years, particularly on the 12th of September 2021, where after seeing a second Prime Minister in as many years, or three Prime Ministers in 2 years, we saw the signing of an MoU between Pakatan Harapan and the federal government. It's important to note that this is an MoU, it is not a CSA, regardless of what Wong Chin Huat tells you. An MoU does not imply that we give explicit confidence to the Prime Minister. Rather, we agree not to mount a no confidence motion, and that we will support, or at the very least, not support or abstain from supporting the budget for 2022. But that is water under the bridge at this point in time. By the MoU also has been misunderstood as being as will end on the 31st of July. This is a fabrication by certain people who want the MoU to end. The MoU ends when the Parliament is dissolved. So long as Parliament is not dissolved, the MoU still stands. It's just that one of the clauses in the MoU expressly states that the government will not dissolve Parliament before the 31st of July of 2022. But what's important to note is that this is the first time that a mechanism of this sort, this construct, has been put forward, particularly to further a legislative agenda. If you were to look at the next slide, I don't know if you can see, it's a little bit small, but there are about 18 items in particular that are meant to be achieved in the MoU. The green ticks indicate those that have successfully been implemented. And there are, out of 18, there are 12 that have been completed. One, which will have to be perpetually be a work in progress. The one is memastikan Badan Kehakiman sentiasa bebas dari sebarang campur tangan mana-mana pihak. Yeah? So the independence of the judiciary is not something which has a terminus, has an end point. It must always be in place until, at the very least, in terms of this MoU, until the MoU ends. Yeah? But of course, as Malaysians, you know, we want to see that the judiciary is never interfered with. So this item on the independence of the judiciary is not something which has a timeline. It's, you know, must always be implemented. And then there are 4 others, and all 4 to be completed all involve Parliament. Yeah, so the one that we will be talking about now is limiting the Prime Minister's tenure to 10 years. Second one is the anti-hopping bill. The third one is a Parliamentary Services Act. And the fourth one is to amend the standing orders of Parliament to make sure the gains that we have seen, particularly with the Parliamentary Special Select Committees, are put in place permanently. Right now, our Parliamentary Special Select Committees are there at the behest, really as a motion and a decision by the Speaker. It's not something which is set in stone in the Parliamentary Standing Orders. And there are certain procedures which are very important for us to put in place. If we were to look at how Parliamentary Special Select Committees perform and function in jurisdictions such as the United Kingdom, including, for example, a lot of the committees in Westminster. So the one that, of course, I'm going to be talking about is the limiting the Prime Minister's tenure. Next slide, please. Yeah. So these are the 5 that are not yet complete. I've just put a red bar around it. Chin Huat, yes, I know my slides. Next slide. Yeah, in 2018, when Pakatan Harapan came up with this, our manifesto, so the 12th promise ataupun janji ke-12 has to do with limiting the tenure of the Prime Minister. In this document, which we used in the last elections, it is 2 terms. And I'll explain why from 2 terms, the discussion now has shifted to 10 years. Yeah, but that expressly states, sorry, it's a bit small. Yeah, tempoh jawatan Perdana Menteri akan dihadkan kepada 2 penggal sahaja. Okay, but then let's take a look at the next slide. So these are all of our Malaysian Prime Ministers from 19 63, of course, given that if we talk about Malaysia, but of course, Tunku Abdul Rahman had served as the Prime Minister of Malaya, Tanah Melayu, since 1957, all the way through to today. How long have each of them served in terms of months? Next slide. Or years, sorry, yeah. So we've seen that actually there are only really two Prime Ministers served more than 10 years, which is Tunku Abdul Rahman and Dr. Mahathir. Too long, Dr. Mahathir, but that's my own personal opinion. I think many of us. But one came close, Najib, but most of the others average about 5 years. If you were to look at it, on average is about 7.2 years. Yeah, their service in terms of since Malaysia has been around. Yeah, so since since 1963. So is there really a need? If we've only had two Prime Ministers who've served more than 10 years, is there really a need to limit the Prime Minister's tenure? Or does this political system, the political ecosystem, actually mean that every 10 years there will somehow, between 5 and 10 years, there will somehow always be a new Prime Minister? Not necessarily so. And I think we must remember the development of whether it's parliamentary process, procedure, precedent, is a direct reflection of evolution in society. And a lot of our discussion in 2018, when we were constructing the manifesto for Pakatan Harapan, is derived from some of the safeguards that we felt need to put in place in case another Dr. Mahathir or another Tunku Abdul Rahman or another Najib, if Najib had won, what would that scenario have been like? If we were to look at the development of Westminster as a parliament that has been around for 800 years, a lot of what happens in society affects and impacts the way that parliament shapes itself, whether the country has a constitution, doesn't have the kind of powers accorded and afforded, the kind of symbolism, the kind of process and procedures. So in the context of why we are talking about limiting the power or the tenure of the Prime Minister, it's really as a result of particularly the last so many years, after we've seen what happened to Malaysian democracy during the 22 and the third year of Dr. Mahathir's rule in particular, and how to make sure that things get better from there. Next slide. So why should we limit? Yeah, if prime ministers don't last that long. Right now, as I said, we've had three prime ministers in as many years. So what is there to say that every 5 years we won't have a new prime minister or less than that? It's an important balance to make between having some kind of stability in the system, as well as making sure that people don't overstay their welcome. Yeah. And more important than that, to make sure that there is no, erosion of whether it's the separation of powers, yeah, between the legislative, judiciary, and the executive, executive overreach particularly. But it is important to see this reform in the context of an array of reforms, a basket of reforms. Yeah, the whole host of reforms, which I think we will be talking about in these next 2 days. So you can't view this reform in and of itself alone, isolated in a vacuum from all of the reforms that we intend to do. There's no point in just passing one if all of the others kita tak buat. So I have said this at a recent program that was hosted by Ideas, that whether we're talking about limiting the Prime Minister's tenure, having a political financing act, having an anti-hopping bill, each of these reforms, if they can't stand alone. They have to be done holistically together, because what we've seen is over the last 2-3 decades particularly is the systematic erosion of not only trust but also the system itself. Yeah. And so these are wide systemic reforms that we need to put in place to make sure that Malaysian democracy can be put on the right track again. Next slide. How should we limit the tenure of the Prime Minister? So if we were to look at the simplest and actually the most important, the most critical piece of law is the Federal Constitution, Article 43(2)(a), where it stipulates that His Majesty, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, must, before appointing a cabinet, must appoint a member of the Dewan Rakyat that His Majesty believes has the majority support of other members of the Dewan Rakyat. So right now, the discussion within the MoU Steering Committee and the team that is particularly discussing this is how do you go about outlining the kind of the law, the language, while maintaining a balance between the powers of His Majesty as well as a lot of the details. So for example, these 10 years, is it cumulative? So if Muhyiddin Yassin, who served 1.3 years or something like that, if he gets to become Prime Minister again, do we reset the clock, or is it 10 minus 1.3 years? What happens if a Prime Minister has served 2 terms, but 2 terms is about, say, 4.5 years, so 9 years, or 9 and a bit more, and he's got maybe about 6 months left. Can he remain as a Prime Minister? How do you hand over practical considerations? But they have quite real and practical implications. So that's why I think the administration, I don't speak for the administration, and Dr. Sri Rizwan also is not part of the MoU Steering Committee. Actually, the person that is best to have here throughout these 2 days is Dr. Wan Junaidi. He is, in my mind, the most pivotal member of cabinet, but also in terms of making sure that these reforms are done, he's also the most hardworking. I feel that he, particularly in terms of the anti-hopping law, he has been, I think he has really stuck his neck out. And we have had many meetings with Datuk Sri Rizwan as part of representing Bersatu. We had a meeting where it was very tense, but not on our side, not between government and Pakatan Harapan, but on the government side. And it became rather interesting to witness, but I won't air dirty laundry here. Just suffice to say, well, that's a first. There's always a first for everything. So I'm glad to have been a fly on the wall during that occasion. But there are both reforms, or rather, there needs to be amendment to the Federal Constitution. We need to look at whatever corollary or what other pieces of legislation that need to be put in place. But more than that, it's also about setting in place an idea of the civil service. In the UK, for example, the idea that Whitehall is not part of Downing Street. Whitehall is Whitehall. And that every time you get near an election, Whitehall would advise leaders of both parties, if there is a transition, this is what you do, and they try to remain neutral in that sense. Likewise, I think for Putrajaya, trying to divorce itself from cabinet, understanding that it is not part of the party political machinery, I think this is an important reform that needs to be had. It's cultural. I know both my parents were civil servants. My mom was the DG of Bahayu, Bahagian Hal Ehwal Undang-Undang, during Dr. Mahathir's last few years. So I know what it means to have a member of someone who sits in that position. But there also needs to be some kind of mindset change. Some of that began when Pakatan Harapan came to power. And some of that persists informally now, because you have a situation where civil servants, they don't entirely know, or rather, they're more circumspect. They're like, okay, will these guys be in power next week? We're not sure. So they're a bit more guarded, but very professional, I feel, at least, especially so now. So in order for us to have constitutional change, that means we need 2/3 majority. Can we find 2/3 majority? Can the Prime Minister, as leader of the Ketua Majlis, that's the term that it's used, can he find a 2/3 majority? This is something which I don't think is elusive, but I think it's a challenge for him. right now. So I don't know whether that is something which is delaying a lot of the changes. Yeah. Next slide. When should we limit the tenure of the Prime Minister? So if we were to look at the MOU, it's quite clear. Actually, we've gone past the time, in the sense that the timeline stated in the MOU says the first session of Parliament in 2022, yeah, for this reform. But it is not, how do you say, we are flexible in terms of the timing, as long as it gets done. So we have one shot now in July, unless Parliament is not dissolved after the 31st of July and we get to the budget session, in which case there's a little bit more time. But for me, as a first-term parliamentarian, I like to see a lot of these reforms, not only limiting the Prime Minister's tenure, but more importantly, actually, to me, one of the most critical pieces of legislation that we need to pass in Parliament is a Parliamentary Services Act that will ensure independence of Parliament, that Parliament can set some of its own rules. For example, setting an amount for constituency development fund, so that Parliament disperses, not the Prime Minister, at his pleasure. And if you were to do that, independence of Parliament, it also waters down a little bit the powers of the Prime Minister, but also helps to make sure that the ecosystem is much more healthy. I think there's one more slide, maybe. Or maybe that's it. Oh, okay, never mind. Then next slide. It's okay. This is the one where it says, yeah, it says it has to be done not later than the first session of Parliament in 2022. So now we've gone past that. But these two, the anti-hopping law and the limiting the Prime Minister's tenure to not more than 10 years, these have to be dealt with in this coming session of Parliament. Next, last one. So what's the current state of play? Very fluid, very dynamic, very interesting, intriguing. Depends who you try to understand. Who are they representing? The politics of lawmaking, really. So the MOU Steering Committee has been very focused on making sure that the anti-hopping law is passed. I'm a member, so that's me somewhere there next to Gobin, between Gobin and Saifuddin. Gobin is to the far left, and then that's myself, Saifuddin Nasution, Anthony Lok, and Salahuddin Ayub. And then on the right-hand side, representing the government, is Tan Sri Adam Musa, Tengku Zafrul, Datuk Sri Hamzah, Datuk Sri Wan Junaidi, and Datuk Sri Taqiyuddin. Ya, semua berseri-seri Datuk Sri. So, no female reps. Yeah. So why? I mean, that's another a discussion for another panel. Probably we can have a 3-day session for that. But what's important to state is that right now, in terms of getting the work done, getting the law ready, I feel that Datuk Sri Dr. Wan Junaidi has done his work. The AG has come to brief us, not necessarily. Well, I can say this is the first time that I'm experiencing the actual process of how the government puts together a bill. So everything is berstatus rahsia, right? So I can only share a little bit. But the process involves getting some kind of direction from Cabinet or from the MOU Steering Committee as to what we mean by this, how should they interpret this so that AGC can come up with the proper legal language to be put into a bill. So I think we have not had a meeting of the MOU Steering Committee since maybe 3-4 weeks ago. I think a meeting could be set probably before Parliament begins, so that we know what is the situation. Because the second session, so Parliament meets 3 times a year. The second session, the first is when the King comes to officiate. The second is kind of like where all the bills are passed. It's just government business. The third one is the budget session. So the second one is where we are at. And this is where most of the bills, yeah, can be brought and passed. The question is, which bills? So it is the prerogative of the Prime Minister as Ketua Majlis, and government business takes precedence. So I, for one, Suki, I, for one, have submitted a private member's bill to amend the PDPA, the Personal Data Protection Act, with the help of some friends from the Bar Council and also my legal team. And it's the first time I'm drafting a bill. Like, okay, wow, it's cool. But I do feel that actually the Bar Council has a very important role. A lot of lawmakers have not actually been through the process of sitting down, constructing that formal document, which becomes a bill. Yeah? And I think this is where, whether it's subject matter experts, experts within the Bar Council that could help us look at, what are the things that we should look at. I foresee more opportunities to engage. So suffice to say, we will know probably in the next week whether this bill and all the other bills that we're waiting for will come to Parliament or not. If not, well, let's see. Let's wait and see. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, YB Fahmi. That was very interesting. So we'll head on straight into the session. So since you said there has been no meeting since 3 to 4 weeks ago, can we just get an update on what's the actual progress on the amendment itself?
We have not, because the last meeting was focused on the anti-hopping bill, we have not gotten a draft. I have personally not gotten a draft of the limiting the Prime Minister's tenure, the latest draft. But one draft which I have cited before is not a complicated document, but the process to get it passed will be very complicated. As I said, if we're going to amend the federal constitution, which we need to, it's about mustering a 2/3 majority for the Prime Minister.
Okay, does that mean that we're nowhere close to like actually seeing it?
Yeah, I think we're close, but sometimes, this being so the legislative process is one, the political process is another. The political process is very it's like trying to grasp ether, trying to hold on to, is quite delicate in that sense, yeah. And I think we all can see this every single day.
All right. So, what would you say is the biggest challenge in ensuring the amendment happens?
I don't know whether a lot of constituents, whether ordinary Malaysians, feel that this is a top priority for them. It's not clearly, how do you say, it seems like a very technocratic piece of amendment. It's not something which is relatable to them, because for most Malaysians, civic education means, in their minds, Wakil Rakyat, Ahli Parlimen, Perdana Menteri is someone who is omnipotent. Yeah, so they don't feel that, they don't understand why this should even be an issue. But trying to explain, you can't explain directly, but you will see the impact indirectly. This is something which, is a tough thing for us to try to explain. But for sure, there are segments of our constituents who are very passionate about this issue. So in my constituency, for example, definitely kalau pergi ke Bangsa, people will ask me about it, right? So this to me is a real challenge.
All right, so YB Shuki, what is your biggest challenge, since YB Fahmi said that it's about the public perception and acceptance to it, right?
Thank you, Tasneem. Thank you, the organizer, for organizing this forum for us to discuss all these reforms. For me, the biggest challenge, not only the public perception. Of course, now almost everyone just pay their attention on anti-hopping bill. So when we talk about the reforms and the MOU, most of these discussions, all are around anti-hopping bill. And very few people talk about other reforms like public financing or this 10-year tenure and so on and so forth. So of course, that is one challenge. But to me, what I see is political will. Political will of the current government, and most important, political will of those leaders who envision themselves to be the future prime minister. whether they are willingly, voluntarily to limit their future possible tenure. I think that is important to realize that we need not only the political will of the current Prime Minister and his cabinet and his political party, but also every political actor in the Parliament today. We need everyone to consent. We need to build a structure that is healthy enough for Malaysia democracy to develop. So we have to do something now, because the coming election will be the first election after the first political transition. So what we are doing before the next election is very important. We are setting the milestone. We are setting the base. After the next election, we don't know what will happen, whether the next government is going to push through or going to continue the reforms. So I think what we are doing now is very important before next general election. We are setting the base. So now the question is whether all 220, because we lost 2 already, all 220 parliamentarians sitting in the parliament, the lower house, Dewan Rakyat, willing to push through this reform and rebuild our democratic institution. To me, that is the biggest challenge.
Okay, Shuki, that's interesting that you talk about the anti-hopping bill, because everyone is super focused on that. So what do you think, aside from, you mentioned just now that the political actors are not playing an active role to pursue this further, right, because of their future. So YB Fahmi, why have they been very quiet? Like, do you know any of them who has been against it?
No, I think some of it has to do with questions that they had. I mean, if you were to look at some of the questions that were raised about anti-hopping bill, those who are expelled from parties, do you consider that to be hopping or not? So a lot of the discussion in the committee, in the MOU, the steering committee, revolves around this kind of feedback that they received from engagement with political parties. So, like I said, you know, if Tan Sri Muhyiddin were to become Prime Minister again, does it reset at 10? Or is it, you know, he's only got 7 more years, you know, 8.7 more years or something like that? What about Dr. Mahathir, who has served, you know, two times that length, right? So how can? But I think nak seribu daya, tak nak seribu dalih. So I feel that some of the discussion actually is a delay tactic, and the delay really has to do with some of the machinations, cloak and dagger within certain political parties, not in Pakatan Harapan. I was there when we were drafting the MOU document, saying what is what, and at that time there was, you know, by the end, I can tell you, on the 11th of September, malam tu, pukul maybe about after Maghrib, about 8 something, agree. Because they wanted to get the thing signed, you know, at that time. Of course, them is who. Now them ni dah split sikit lah. Kan? So again, it's about political will. It's about the kind of political games that some of these people are playing to the detriment and without understanding that there is they have an opportunity to fix things. Instead, they're trying to fix things for themselves. And this selfishness, whether it's those who want to call for elections now or whatever it is, right? Although some people feel that, oh, we should have elections now and you know, clear. If we have elections now without getting all of these things done, you're going to have the same lot again. You're going to have the same problem again. Sorry for raising my voice. Sometimes kena emosi sikit because, you know, this is a rather dry subject, right? So, tapi, that's why I think whether it's civil society, whether it's activists, whether it's ordinary citizens, what we need to communicate, and probably, I don't know if that's the reason why our colleague is not here right now. Perhaps he's trying to find parking for his flying car. But we need to make sure that people, particularly MPs, understand, you know, what is at stake. We go to elections now without having a Parliamentary Services Act. You're going to have the same kind of pressure applied to people like Syed Saddiq, yeah, to people like everybody lah, to support this person or that person, which to me will have a very bad effect. We have to find in the big picture a new mechanism for a modus vivendi between these differing interests. Whether a structure, a construct like the MOU can serve as that means of a modus vivendi, I don't know. But what we're seeing right now, at least Ismail Sabri's administration kind of has lasted this long. 0.9 years. So if he calls for elections now, he will be the shortest serving prime minister. So.
Okay, so how would this tenureship hold the prime minister accountable? Like, is he not now? What would the difference be?
Actually, I think we have to look at how our prime minister in Malaysia functions for the past few decades first. Of course, everyone remembers Tun Mahathir has super long tenure. 22 years for the first round, he became prime minister. Then a very short term, the second time. So we all remember the 22 years, and I would say that the 22 years of Tun Mahathir in the prime minister office developed our prime minister to become a position like United States president. And the White House today, the White House we see today in United States is unlike 200 years ago. The White House we see today actually expanded, developed along the years. Almost every president of United States add on a room, add on something, expand their power for 200 years and become what we see today. And the same thing happened in Malaysia, unfortunately. We actually take Westminster system, but our prime minister, after 6 decades, the formation of Malaysia and so on, our prime minister somehow became so powerful. Until today, we look up to prime minister and everyone wants to be prime minister, or a lot of people wants to become prime minister because it is so powerful in our political institution that he has a say on almost everything. While other ministers, ministries, or even parliament do not seem function at all. Just now, Fahmi mentioned about the PSA, Parliamentary Service Act. I'm so ashamed to say that our parliament structure, in terms of black and white, the legal structure, it is only a jabatan under Prime Minister Department. It is an shame to Malaysia. We should put it back to where it should be. It should be on par with the executive power and the legal side. We cannot put our parliament just a jabatan under the Prime Minister Department. So it is important to us to look at it. How do we hold Prime Minister accountable? Does this piece of law, these amendments, hold him or her accountable? I would say at least the person who hold the position and the office know clearly there is a term limit. No point for you to expand power like the predecessor before for you to enjoy the power and everything in the future. So we need to set a limit. So the person who hold the office know clearly, no point for me to do, to add on another room of power and another room because he or she is not going to enjoy it forever. He is not an emperor. She is not an emperor. So I think that is important to have a fixed, not necessarily fixed term. Fixed term is the next topic we are going to discuss. But at least it's something fixed that the person knows that he has to leave the office after 10 years or 2 terms. So we should not like expand the power like before. And we should have a clear reform agenda to do it within his or her tenure. So I think that is what is meaningful for this reform.
All right, so you talk about, like, are we taking questions? Okay, maybe we can do the Q&A after we finish? Okay. So you talk about expansion of power, right? And because we don't want a person to hold on to the position forever. So, Fahmi, what's your take on it?
On what?
On the account, how does this actually hold the Prime Minister accountable?
This in and of itself will not hold the Prime Minister accountable. Actually, if Parliament were right now, for example, for the Speaker to pass any in-house costing, whatever it is, to have funds, he has to ask from the Minister of Finance, yeah, which means that he is to some extent subservient to the Minister of Finance. Nak dapatkan kelulusan untuk pergi mana-mana, uruskan program apa-apa, the approval for his budget comes from the Minister of Finance. And the Speaker of the House, in terms of protocol for state function, is the same as the Chief Justice, as the Prime Minister. They are co-equals. They are the heads of their respective branches. And yet, the Speaker is subservient to the Minister of Finance. That's ridiculous. So, if we were to remind everybody that there are all these corrections that need to be put in place, then we will remind everybody that there will be a system of checks and balances. Yeah? So you will not get kind of like a slippage of the Speaker saying, I have to refer to the Prime Minister. No. Yeah, you are the leader of the House. The Prime Minister is just a member in the House. Yes, he leads the government bench, right? Some of the other reforms, some of the other changes that we've seen actually since about 2013, yeah, having a Prime Minister's question, Minister's question time, not Prime Minister's question time, but Minister's question time at the very least, is a step in the right direction. I like what Suki was saying earlier about evolution, right? And it's important to understand and look at the kind of like that progress. Yeah, how are we moving, right? Are we moving away? Are we moving closer to what we understand as a society to be an ideal? But in order to do this, there's a question on the thing which I'd like to address because it's related. What are the potential obstacles to securing two-thirds majority in Parliament for the Prime Minister term limit? What are some of the reservations from both sides? Yeah, okay, I mentioned some already. But to secure, this is the challenge, yeah? To pass a Parliamentary Services Act, you just need a simple majority. But to amend the Constitution, you need two-thirds majority. Whether MPs will bow to pressure from their constituents who want to see that kind of change. You know, I have to listen to Wong Chin Huat because he's my constituent. Where is he? Sometimes he too much. But but you know, if you have constituents like that and you have responsive MPs, then you will have that kind of exchange. But like Suki was saying, there is a long-lasting perception that a member of Parliament or a Prime Minister or a minister, you know, you have a certain status in society. We treat them very, very differently, right? So perhaps some of the changes can happen within us right now. Maybe it's a tall ask, maybe it's a big ask, you know. Maybe it begins, yeah, with these kind of small changes. But I think, to me, again, we have to look at this big picture of all of the reforms that we need to do. Kalau tak selesai satu, maka mungkin tak selesai semua. Tapi kalau kita dapat selesaikan sebanyak mungkin, then we are on that road. And what's important is to keep chiseling away. Yes, we are seeing, you know, the kind of new appointments that may not be positive for whether it's human rights or the development of, you know, civil society. But we have to push back. We have to, you know, it's partly the role of whether it's elected representatives or civil society to have that kind of pushback.
All right. So, okay, I'm just going to ask a random question here. What if the Prime Minister is popular and well-liked and providing a stable economy, a stable social, you know, social balance in the country, and people want him to stay, want him to remain, but because of this tenureship, he can't or she can't. So what is the situation for that? Like, should they be given an option to stay, or is it a must go? You know, like the United States, we saw that during the Obama and Trump transition. So what's your thoughts on it?
I think having a term limit is good. Yeah, and right now it's different between a legislator and a member of the executive. As Suki said earlier, the executive right now has so much power, right? Has so much power, and this power is ada punca kuasa. That means it's not just cakap mulut, right? They have the power to instruct agencies to do this and to do that. Parliament doesn't. So if for example, we're arguing to limit a member of parliament, but a member of parliament's term limit, a member of parliament does not have executive power. Parliament cannot instruct anyone to do anything. You can only provide syur, cadangan, gesaan, you can move motions, but you cannot compel in the same way that the executive does. And this is an important thing to remember. Whereas for the executive, it is important to, having seen, remember, we have not yet dealt with this collective trauma, which is 1MDB, the collective debt that 1MDB owes to Malaysian society until 2036. And one of the reasons for us to do this is we cannot see those kinds of transgressions, those kinds of excesses repeated again, because the precariousness of our public finances, the kind of deleterious effect that that kind of political culture will have on Malaysian democracy at a time when many Malaysians mungkin tak nak keluar mengundi, right? And that will embolden those elements to continue to remain as they are. And I think that's not going to be good. So to me, I don't know what Suki, maybe she has a different perspective.
I have only one line answer to that. There is no human being as perfect as God. Regardless how well-liked the person is, there will be weakness in him or herself. So we should have a better institution than a person. So we should empower the institution, build a better and solid institution to protect the rakyat's benefit instead of empower the leader to be like godlike. Yeah.
Do you want to take questions for the first session? Okay, first block. We can provide the mic.
Thank you. May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Thank you. My question.
Maybe you could state your name and.
Sorry. My apologies. My name is John, KJ John. Ex-public servant, was involved in public policy for 33 years. Now interested as a general citizen as part of the GI movement, Gerak Independent. Okay. My question is directed to actually all the Bar Council members here, because we faced a situation recently. The police today is my greatest concern, the police force. Okay, and the word force is implied in police. So first, they stopped the Bar Council at that, handing over the letter to parliamentarians, and they use force to stop, when in fact the Bar Council is a co-equal institution as the police force. If I'm wrong, can somebody stand up and explain to me why I'm wrong? Second, this week also I understand from some internal communication that they stopped a lawyer and harassed her using some religious code. The question again is the police responsible for religious codes in Malaysia? I thought we're done with that since the days they walk into restaurants and check whether you are halal to eat or not. And thirdly, I heard also recently that the Pahang royalty lady who's been protesting the green agenda has been informed by the police to tone down. Is this true? So my question is the royalty in Malaysia so blind not to see the contradictions between unity of all Malaysians? Can I argue, therefore, that we need the royalty not? Thank you very much.
Okay, I think
Before you answer, can I just say something?
Yeah.
The title of this conference is actually what reforms do voters want? I think the first thing the organizers should start with is the change of mentality with this VVIP section, the feudal mindset.
Okay.
Why do we have seats for VVIPs and then there are seats for the rest of us? I think I'm not sure whether the VVIP with a really nice covered chair, and we have a bag chair. Yeah, wait, that is the first one.
Right.
Change of mentality, feudal mindset. This VVIP, okay, we have to change that. That's number one. Number two, I'm sorry, I don't hear talks about the real things that we should change with our politicians. Now you're talking only about an area about the time of the Prime Minister. What about the mentality and the quality of our MPs, Parliament? We have very poor qualities MPs, not all of them, but most of them. Okay, and you, as MPs in Parliament, you do not speak up on behalf of us. You actually speak up for your political parties. Yeah,
Siti,
so this is what the voters want.
with due respect.
Yeah, you speak up for us. Yeah.
Thank you, Siti.
Yeah. I'm just saying.
No, I'm
Yeah,
sorry. Siti, this is our conference organized by the Malaysian Bar and Brunei.
Well.
I think how we want to organize it, who we want to invite,
Wow. Okay.
and what topic we want to address, it is our prerogative, isn't it? If you organize your own conference, you are free to talk about all those topics that you brought up. And please organize one. All right, if that is so important to you, please do so. And I think the question, it's not even a question raised by John, is unrelated to this topic that we are discussing. Talking about the Prime Minister tenure. And I think let's respect the time that we have allocated to discuss this topic and just focus on those topics, okay? All right, so thank you. But I think there are many important points still in this 2 days conference that we'll be discussing. And I hope you will stay on and engage with those topics and not bring your own topics into this conference. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, yeah. I like to, yeah, I understand. I like to just briefly respond before the next question, in the sense that right now, a lot of these questions, right, when in my work as an MP, when I go to the ground, people come to me with these questions, in the sense that they come to me expecting, as a member of Parliament, as a legislator, as a lawmaker, I can answer and do things to solve this problem, that problem. Likewise, the perception is that the Prime Minister is omnipotent and can use his executive power to do everything, to answer every question, which, as Suki was saying, what we want to see is enduring systems, institutions that will actually be able to help people without necessarily going through a Prime Minister or a Member of Parliament. It's about increasing some kind of access and making sure that it is done with proper oversight. So I think, while not directly related, but this is the kind of situation we face almost on a daily basis. As an MP, I get not only questions about how will you tackle issues of cost of living, but I have people who ask me, YB, can you please fix my drain? YB, can you please come and see what's happening on the ground, right? That kind of expectation is on us. But to me, in terms of how I try to change the mindset of, the people that I interact with, I say, this is the purview of this agency. I will come down with this agency to highlight what is going on. If the matter is unresolved, I will raise this through Parliament, for example, which I have done. So I think having the kind of change that many of us want to see, the quality of our MPs, a lot of that will come, it may have to be a generational change. Yeah, it may have to be a generational change, because a lot of those MPs who are serving now have been serving for a very long time, and they have survived under that system of those 22 years when a lot of things went unchecked. So this is why, to me, in an indirect way, you know, this is exactly why we need to limit the tenure of the Prime Minister. Thank you.
Maybe I will add on a bit, since talking about members of parliament. I think it is unjust to evaluate the performances of MP merely from the floor of the House. Because to me, the House, Dewan Rakyat that we usually see, is just the tips of the iceberg. The real works happen at committee level. Unfortunately, all the select committee, including PSC, is not allowed to live stream. You can only see our works through handset and very thick report, then we on table only later, very much later, and not many people going to read it because it's boring. However, we used to watch live stream of United States Senate or Congress. We enjoy how they grill the witness and everything, but we have never seen in Malaysia. Why? Because we need to reform our parliament. We need to empower our house, upper house and lower house. We need to empower all the MP and make sure they work in the select committee or PAC or all other committees. That is where we need to evaluate whether our member of parliament works or not. And not just merely whether they give talks, speak well on the floor of the Dewan Rakyat. Because it's basically just a stage to giving speech, but it is not enough. We need to see more real actions at the committee level. And that is the reason we talk about all the reforms today, because one trigger another is one piece of the bill will not get things done, which is why it's important to have 2 days, because it's one follow another. After limit the tenure of the Prime Minister, we need other piece of reform as well. We cannot just limit the tenure of the Prime Minister without empowering the Parliament. The things won't change. That is why we are today. Thank you.
All right, that was an interesting situation. Thank you so much, YB Fahmi and Shuki. So before we have 10 more minutes on the discussion on the topic itself. So before we end, I would like to ask you guys, about you mentioned just now about generational renewal, because some MPs have been in the position for the past 6 to 10 terms themselves, right? So, but you also mentioned that it should be implemented on the MPs because they don't have executive power. But don't you think there's a detachment between the people and the MPs themselves, and then towards the reforms and the federal level?
A lot of this comes down to education. Trying to be close to the next generation. While Pakatan Harapan was in power in terms of engagement with schools, that was happening. Now, to some extent, because of an MOU, we kind of can have some kind of engagement. And this is important, not because we want to give ideology or whatever it is, but future voters can try to understand directly, Didi ahli parlimen, Didi bukanlah orang kata macam dewa ke, afar, because oftentimes people view MPs as larger than life. But, we have, all the kind of, we're just people, we're just ordinary people like yourselves, just with a little bit better access, in that sense. So in order to have that kind of generational change, we need mass, consistent engagement. We are seeing that because of social media, but that's not enough. So a lot more engagement has to happen in schools. And it's just about, for example, educating teenagers who are going to be voters when they turn 18 about the value of being enfranchised. What does it mean to be able to vote? Whether you're voting for your class monitor, for your head prefect, or later for an MP or an ADON. What does it mean? And what is that trade-off? You know, that is not happening. Actually, dekat sekolah ni, a lot of things. You don't even know how to bayar cukai, you know, lesen, all those basic things, right? Yeah, so you can do admats, but you don't know what it means to be a voter. So I think there is a very big problem there. To me, university students, what we're seeing actually, especially in the last 3-4 years, because of people like Mazli Malik, to some extent, we're seeing a little bit more free, the students are a bit more free to express. Despite being told they can't go out about the cost of living issue, they did, right? And you know, it's okay to hear students in UiTM who say, no, you don't have to. That's democracy for you, right? Some will agree, some will not agree. But you have a right, and you have a right to express. So these young people who are right now, some of them being called in, they are experiencing the state for the first time. That was how I went through it, you know. I remember in 2004 being arrested in front of Bukit Aman. And that was my engagement, and how my mom, who was KP Bahayu at that time, had to come and not fish me out, come and scold me in front of all the other people who were arrested. And so I was like, yeah, aku dah jadi hero, lawan. Tiba-tiba mak tuil telinga kan, in front of all my friends. But that was my first engagement with the state. Other people, lots more people, need to engage with the state. We cannot see it as apa orang kata, mythologized or mythical. It's what's and all. As a member of parliament who looks after Bukit Aman, and as an MP who tries to solve their problems as ordinary citizens, I see them, what's and all. And I empathize. I don't, claw back on my own values, my own beliefs. Tapi I try to understand the other. This is, I think, a big Malaysian project that we need to do. It's not about us and them, which is what some people want to do. But how is it that, we can try to understand each other and to some extent coexist and prosper. Something like that lah. This is not a spiel, but at the heart of it, to see that kind of generational change, you need to push. But I think we need to see more young people especially, because the way they see the world is completely different. Young people, to me lah, young people. And kalau siapa-siapa anak muda nak bertanding kat lembah pantai, jemput.
Okay, Shuki, what about you? Do you think MPs should have a tenure limit? And also, what about the generational renewal?
I think I agree with Fahmi. It's different, and we shouldn't limit, tenure on member of parliament. I think it's a bit different from what we put on prime minister, because we don't have the executive power. However, I would say that we should try to evaluate how MPs perform. That is what I stressed earlier. And so we should empower parliaments. So MP can really perform their duty. Just like Fahmi said just now, this was his first time to table a private member's motion, right? Many of us have never done that. But it is quite normal in other countries, and their citizens' organization usually evaluate their performances based on how many draft or bill or amendments they submit. But in Malaysia, usually we judge on the performances of our MPs or electorates based on how many times we turun badang, whether we meet our constituents. I think we need to have a a nice balance of it. And also, beside that, we need to develop a healthy system for not only young people, I would say all the citizens to get involved, not only as the constituents, but also if they have the vision, they have the ambition to join. So it should be a healthy career for everyone, that they can not only serve as electorate at state and parliament level, but also at the local level. Because the local level is the closest level to the constituent. Lembah Pandai doesn't have a councillor. My kawasan has, so I know how close the local representative to the constituent. Actually, they are the closest level and they hold the biggest power actually in the eyes of constituent to change their life immediately. For example, how the trees should be trimmed, how the roads should be designed. Actually, straight away, change the life of everyone who live in that area. So in the eyes of the constituent, actually the local representative of the local council holds a bigger power. But currently we don't have that. But I think it's important. And we need to demystify that once we have the election, only one race will control all. It is not true at all. We need to deconstruct the myth. So if we can have 3-level healthy competition at every level, and empower the elected person at every level, then the person who has political ambition can function or can evolve slowly from every level or jump in between of it. They may find it they are more interested at national level, go for it. Because federal level somehow may be very boring to people who are interested in urban design because you can't change things at the national level. But you can change things and implement something very interesting at the local level. And so does the state level. So then we can have a healthy circle for the political career. It is not only become an elected representative in parliament or state assembly. It can also be other pathway or even researcher or backroom strategies for certain political parties and also political advisor. Unnecessary that everyone needs to be an elected and join the political campaign, then only you can contribute to the political process in Malaysia. So I think to make it a healthy institution is very important for us and also important for the coming generation to join politics. Unnecessary, everyone needs to be an elected person, but that everyone can contribute in the process. Thank you.
All right, so we have one question here, and before we end, so I think it'll be a good question to answer. What's the panelist's view on restructuring the PMO?
Yeah, the Prime Minister's office actually is a huge, so we've been talking about limiting the Prime Minister's tenure, but the PMO itself is a huge entity, right? And it is labyrinthine. If you've been to PMO, as a physical structure, it is quite imposing. But I'd like to just focus on one thing, which by empowering Parliament, it actually neutralizes a little bit of the idea of PMO as an omnipotent, long-reaching arm of the Prime Minister, which is, I think we need to look at, one, by having a Parliamentary Services Act and Parliament itself disbursing Constituency Development Fund rather than the Prime Minister. Right now, the Prime Minister has a 1 billion ringgit discretionary fund. There's a particular name if you look in their budget, yeah? And it's from this 1 billion ringgit that the Prime Minister gives MPs that he wants the Constituency Development Fund. So removing that from the Prime Minister, putting it under Parliament, actually, to some extent, washes down or empowers Parliament even further. So that's one. Secondly is independence of a lot of these agencies, whether it's Suhakam, SPRM. Putting these institutions under Parliament would actually help to not only restructure PMO, but also ensure that these institutions are independent. In my draft, in my private members bill for amending the Personal Data Protection Act, actually one of the key things about this bill is the independence of the Commission on data protection. So how I've structured it, Suki, nanti I'll share with the other MPs, is Parliament does not have executive power, but it has oversight. Right now, a lot of commissions, including if you were to look at the PDPA 2010, if you were to look at it, it states that the minister has executive power to instruct the commissioner to do this or to do that, to have this or to have that. So the minister, cabinet, prime minister in that sense has very, powers, a lot of powers. So by moving institutions under parliament, making sure that they're independent institutions, then we are also restructuring to some extent PMO, empowering these institutions even further to be independent, particularly MECC, for example. Yeah. So I hope my bill will enable anyone who's interested in the construction of legalese or of legal language to look at what are the ways that we can make sure that these institutions such as commissions and commissioners can be independent from the executive. So those are some ways. Thank you.
Shiki, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, exactly. The budget of PMO is huge. If we add on Prime Minister Department, like besar lah. So it's important to look at it from the financial perspective. How are we going to make the things smaller? We do know that before we reform, during our 22 months Pakatan Harapan in the government, we moved SPAT and eventually APAT and back to MOT. Before that, it was parked under Prime Minister Department. And there are still many, functions under the PMO and PMD, which we need to reform. So it's just part of puzzle, and we are just talking a bit in this session. So to me, Prime Minister is only the conductor of a symphony. He's only playing that role. We just need to make sure Prime Minister can conduct the music nicely. But every person in the choir or the symphony plays a very important role to perform a good music. So we need to make sure the Prime Minister is just a conductor and how to make the music nice to hear. And that is a role for Prime Minister to play. And we need to limit his power to that role. Thank you.
Okay, Fahmi, I think we didn't answer one specific question that you promised you'd answer during the slides. Okay, so why is it 10 years and not 2 terms?
Oh, that became because some people felt that a term could be less than 5 years. So, if you look at most of our parliaments, it's not a fixed term like in the UK. So right now, as it stands, the discussion in the steering committee is a term could be 3 years, 3.5 years, 4 years, not 5 years. I think some people want to maximize that.
All right. Okay. So it's mainly about the terms. Okay. Okay. So I think we're ending the session now. So so many things have happened since the 14th general election, and it has revealed the limitations and weaknesses of our political system in managing both one coalition predominance and fluid multi-party competition. It is clear that before the next general election is called, last due in September 14, 2023 next year, there are more reforms that need to be in place to ensure stability for the people and for the country. So we hope things progress further as we enter the new session. And thank you so much for watching. All right, thank you for joining this session, everyone.
Thank you, Tasneem. Thank you, Shuji and Fahmi. I think before you leave the floor, we would like to present a small token of appreciation. I think this first session's talking about the Prime Minister tenure, but it's not, as we see from the discussions, right? It is not just about the topic, but it is expanding into Parliament, functioning Parliament, independent of parliaments. And this is exactly what we wanted to do and what we have been, really working on. Group photo for the first sessions. Speaker. And Karen as well. Let's take a first. So we will start the second sessions at 11:30 sharp. And this is a second session is really about constructive vote of no confidence and fixed term parliament. right? And we will be presenting a paper from expert Ms. Maha. But in the meantime, you can proceed with a short break, but come back at 10:30 sharp because we are going to start that. Oh, sorry, 11:30 sharp. Sorry, my mistake. 11:30 so that we can immediately start on that discussions. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the first session just now. Thank you. 11:30, we will be back here, yeah? Let's set up the stage for the second sessions.